All right, so I'm going to start off a little differently. Listen.
Hello, this is Luke.
Hi, Luke. This is Greg from Woodward Strategies. Do you have a minute?
What's this call regarding?
Well, I was doing some research on your company and see that you lead a team of outbound sales reps. So I wanted to share some.
Wait. What's your company called again?
Woodward Strategies.
Strategies?
Woodward Strategies. I typically talk to sales leaders because our program is specifically for their outbound sales team.
Wait, look, I'm not sure I'm the right person for you. I gotta go. Bye.
So who believes that was a shitty call? Pretty good? That was fake, by the way. That was my friend Luke. My name's Greg Woodward. I'm going to talk about outbound, ramping and scaling outbound prospecting. Just a little bit of background. Firm's called Woodward Strategies. I started Woodward Strategies 2 years ago. Been an entrepreneur for 18 years. The first company I started in 2004, we brought mail-in rebates online. It's extremely hard to get our first set of customers. And I developed this process for approaching companies and getting in front of decision makers to try and convince people to be clients. Fast forward a little bit further, 5-6 years later, I became an M&A consultant. So companies would hire me to go out and find qualified buyers for their business. Usually it was after they had somebody that expressed interest in acquiring their company. And they would hire me and do that because they didn't want their identity to be revealed until the buyer, the company that was interested in buying it, expressed some level of interest. So I did that for, 8 years or so. And the last company transaction that I closed was a biotech company, Q4 2017. And then I started the Outbound Accelerator program, which is basically the process and strategy that we used, distilled down into 6 different steps over 6 weeks. And it's specifically for SDRs, outbound sales reps, for B2B tech. So let's jump in. What I'm going to show you, just by the way, this is some case study examples. I'm not going to pitch my program here today or tell you about each part of the program, but I want to show you this just because what we're going to go through are 3 aspects, like 3 core fundamental principles that really make this program successful. And my hope is that these 3 principles will inspire your internal discussions when you're talking about designing different playbooks or maybe designing different internal training curriculum and things like that. So 3 powerful principles. We're going to talk about what makes them so effective, and then I'm going to give you some examples so you can see how to apply these principles, whether it's a cold call or even in your messaging. So to start off, how the brain processes information. This might look a little bit strange to some of you, but maybe not. With outbound, that early part of the sales cycle, right? Reps are not dealing with a logical decision process. They're dealing with an emotional one. So for instance, if I cold called you, the first few seconds of that interaction, what's happening is your subconscious mind is spinning around on overdrive, trying to form a perception of what this is. Is it annoying? Is it a threat? Am I interested in this? Do I know this person? So forth. So knowing that, we have to communicate in a way that basically checks the boxes of those lingering questions that form in the prospect's subconscious mind. Okay? These are just 3 points that will kind of put into context the 3 principles that we're going to talk about. So there's a part of the brain called the reticular activating system. If anybody's ever bought a car and the next day you started seeing that car everywhere, whereas before that you never really noticed it. It's this part of your brain right here. It knows it's a part of your world now, so it's flagging it for you to notice. It's also the part of your brain that, doesn't get alerted when something's not relevant to you. If I asked you what color was the bathroom mat in the bathroom in the hotel room you're staying in tonight, you don't remember because you don't care. It's not relevant to you. Okay? The feature brain, this is a part of the brain that we also have to deal with. Okay? So thinking actually burns calories. And the reality of it is that the prospect, who's in an emotional decision-making process, not the logical one, will always take the path of least resistance. Okay? And if that could be hanging up, that could be ending the call, it could be, just tuning out and staring at their phone, whatever. They're going to take the path of least resistance. And the critical mind, this is the part of the mind that's responsible for throwing up objections at things without us even thinking about it. Okay? And those objections come from a place of inertia in a lot of cases, or maybe with outbound, they come from a prospect jumping to a conclusion. So there's a perception issue. You'll see what I mean in a moment. So here's the first principle, relevant clarity. When your prospect forms a mental image okay, of any kind that's in some way associated with you. Think about a cold call, for instance, or an email in the beginning. And then they're able to associate that image, connect a dot from that image to something that is in some way relevant or familiar to them. Okay? The state they're in when that happens is called relevant clarity. And what makes outbound incredibly effective in the beginning is relevant clarity. If you don't hit relevant clarity in the beginning, then nothing else really matters. The example of the cold call that I just shared with you is exactly what a cold call sounds like. That was a mock example, but it's exactly what a cold call sounds like when I don't achieve relevant clarity. You can hear the prospect cutting me off. I'm sorry, what was your company called again? Because my company's name didn't help him form an image. It's not something that he can immediately form an image with, okay? And when that happens, it's like if you've ever read a book before and you've been reading and reading and then your mind wanders off, and then you come to that moment where you're like, wow, I don't really know what I just read for the last 3 pages. It's the same thing that happens to a prospect, whether it's an email or a cold call, okay? So the way we receive information when we're caught off guard is not the same as it is in a logical discussion, okay? So when we are crafting our approach to prospects, and all of this is email and also on the phone, okay? We need to really understand that, okay? So it starts like this. Image, emotion, relevant clarity. This is a feedback loop. Everything is a feedback loop. Everything in life happens in a feedback loop. In this case, with prospecting, with outbound, emotion means relevant or familiar. Okay, that's what it means. It doesn't mean happy, sad. It just means relevant or familiar. So the image that you promote in the beginning of a call could be an image usually about what you represent, right? I will call somebody and say, I am a consultant based in DC. Because everybody can visualize and form an image without burning any calories as to what that might look like for them. It doesn't have to be comprehensive or anything like that. It just has to be enough, and it has to be somewhat representative of me. Okay? And that's where you get the first point of relevant clarity. And then we want to achieve relevant clarity 2 to 3 times inside of an email and also inside of a cold call. Let's show you some examples as we go through this. The second principle is embedded subtle courtesy. Okay, so the best way to really explain this is with a story. But first, before I do that, this is really a demonstration of genuine courtesy, right, to the prospect leading up to your ask or leading up to your call to action. Okay? It's positioning your call to action. And the reality of it is, you know, the companies that I work with, and I look at the data and we track everything from messaging, and we also track their activity on a per persona basis with cold calling as well. What moves the data probably the most is this. It's insane how incredibly effective this is. Okay? So I'll tell you a story. Everybody can visualize themselves at a Starbucks, right? I was just downstairs at one and got a $5 water right here. But picture yourself at a Starbucks at rush hour in the morning. Follow me for a minute. And there's 100 people in there. And your mind is sort of going around thinking about all the stuff you have to do that day. And then somebody taps you on the shoulder right when you're almost to the register. You turn around and they hand you a $20 bill. They say, I think you dropped this. Then you turn back around and you think to yourself, wait a second, I did have a $20 bill crumbled up in my pocket. I think I did drop it. So at that moment, you feel really, really good. Because in the chaos of rush hour, right, it reminds you that people are generally good. So you feel pretty good about it. Then you get out to the curb and you're crossing the street. And you're sitting there waiting to cross the street and somebody is walking down the street with a latte in their hand, staring at their phone. And they bump into you and they spill it all over you. What do you do? What do you do? If you're anything like me, it's not pretty. And I'm not going to say what I would say because we're on camera, but it would be bad. But then, right before you're getting ready to react, and that's a key word here, react, you see the person's face, and it's the person that handed you the $20 bill. Now what do you do? Right? You might bite your lip a little bit. It goes through a filter, so you can't react the same way to anyone or any situation if right before that situation, the person that's involved in it just expressed genuine courtesy to you. Okay? So it changes the emotional response to something more logical. Okay, so these are the 3 types of objections we receive in sales. Outbound, you're going to receive type 1 and 2. You almost never receive a type 3 unless the prospect that you're talking to has already seen a full demo, I hate that word, but a full demo of whatever it is that you represent, or has already had a discussion. Okay, because with outbound, there's not enough time to educate anybody so they can make a logical decision. Okay, so embedding subtle courtesy actually reduces the emotional objections and the critical mind objections. Okay? So here's some examples. These are weak call to actions in cold emails. The best way to give this example is with cold email, right? What's the best time for me to show you a demo? It will only take 10 minutes. I look forward to speaking with you. What's wrong with that? Okay. I look forward to speaking with you is presumptuous. You're approaching this person. It's an unsolicited approach, and you're assuming that they have time or interest in speaking with you. I can't tell you how many times I see this. These are actually from emails from reps that have gone through my program. And the reality of it is, prospects will almost always hear tonality in their head when they're reading an email. It's negative. Okay, so this is a little nuance that, whether they're conscious of it or not, will actually change the way they perceive what's going on. Another one, I would like to take 20 minutes to talk through our solutions. Does tomorrow or Wednesday at 10 a.m. work better for you? Thanks. Okay, the intention behind writing thanks, for instance, is not a bad one, but it sounds kind of, a little bit of, it doesn't sound like courtesy, right? Thanks. Almost sarcastic the way you read it. And this makes a huge difference. So here's an example of embedded courtesy in the call to action. Just to give you an example, I felt you might find this particularly relevant. This comes after, an email, at the end of an email that indicates to the prospect there's a specific reason they're being approached. Okay? So this is after we've already conveyed value. I felt you might find this particularly relevant. So if it's an option, is the embedded subtle courtesy. I'm not presuming it is. But if it is, I'd like to set up a call to show you what we're doing to generate these results. I'd like to set up the call and give you something, give you a reason why you should do it, not just because I want to do it, right? Would you be open to that? People generally want to be open to things. And like each one of these little nuances on its own doesn't really do anything, but when you combine them and add them together throughout an email, in a message, it does. It moves the data. Okay? So here's another principle, the third one. And I'm going to tie it all together and show you an example of what the whole thing looks like. Drastic contrast. Okay, so this is demonstrating the polar opposite of what a prospect finds typical and predictable. How many times you've received a solicitation call? They usually start out like this. Hello? 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 They come off mute and start reading at you with a script. And you can hear all the people in the background reading at other people, with the script. And the second you have to say hello again, your subconscious mind recognizes that pattern. Okay, what makes something annoying? If you really distill it, what makes something or someone annoying, it's predictable repetition. Think about it. You could know somebody, that person's pretty cool, and then you spend too much time with them and something about them starts to annoy you. Not that they're a bad person, but they can be annoying. It's predictable repetition. So when you're a prospect, and we can all identify with this, when we start to see a pattern that looks familiar, it annoys us. Okay? And that is if that's what's forming our perception of what's going on, that's not favorable. Okay? So perception is reality, and this is interesting. But in some cases, it's easier to change a negative perception than it is to create a positive one that has no prior context. Think about that for a minute. It's easier to change a negative perception than it is to create a positive one that has no prior context. That's pretty nuts. So let me tell you a story. Picture yourself living in a neighborhood. You'll see how powerful this is. Like, honestly, if you apply this to prospecting correctly, I can't even begin to tell you how powerful it is. Follow this. Picture yourself living in a neighborhood. Okay? There's a family down the street with a 15-year-old son. And in your mind, this is a bad kid. It's just your perception. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't really matter because it's true to you. Every time this kid drives by your house, he just got his permit. He's always going too fast. He's always up to no good. And that's just the way you view the world with this person. And then picture yourself, it's a Sunday morning, and you're looking out the window, and you see this kid walking past your other neighbor's driveway, who's an elderly woman who lives across the street. So you notice this, and you're looking at him, and you're thinking the worst case scenario. Then you see him start walking towards your mailbox. He's kind of looking up at the house, sort of almost to determine if someone's there is what it looks like to you. So clearly he's going to vandalize the mailbox, right? So you run to go get your phone so you can capture it all in video. So as you get back to the window, you see this kid now. He's walking up towards the front step, and he rings the doorbell. And you don't really know what's going on at this point, but as the door opens, you see his posture changes to something more respectful. And he smiles and he hands the old woman her mail. Your perception of this kid has just been totally disrupted. And your awareness of that is so apparent because of the drastic contrast between what just happened and what you were expecting. Okay? And let's reverse the situation. Picture this kid is a good kid, right? That in your mind is a really good kid. And this kind of a thing, you may have noticed it, right? This act of courtesy, right? But it wouldn't have resonated with you the same way because the contrast between what you were expecting and what actually happened isn't drastic enough for you to notice it. So you can actually change a negative perception much more than you can create a positive perception that has no prior context. It's incredible. So what does this all sound like? So I'm going to show you an example. This actually is a real call recording. Obviously, I'm going to bleep out the names, but this is me cold calling a CEO's office and dealing with an executive assistant. Okay. So what is an executive assistant? This is how you apply this to prospecting. What does the executive assistant find annoying? Take a guess. Just take one guess. What do you think an executive assistant's tired of? Trying to get to her boss. I mean, people calling and trying to push through. Treat him like an obstacle, right? What do you think, how many calls do you think an executive assistant gets in a given week? Somebody trying to push through them like an obstacle. A lot. So when these calls start out, they can usually spot them immediately, right? And they almost could literally complete the other person's sentences. They're also really tired of, and I can tell you this because I've talked to enough of them. The call I'm going to show you I've made literally thousands of times when I was doing M&A. They always have a sparring match with people. When they call, they try to act like they know the CEO. They don't. And then they try to get the CEO's email address. I can't give you that. Then there's a sparring match that follows, right? Listen.
Kevin, office.
Hi, my name's Greg Woodward. I'm a consultant based in DC. Do you have a minute? I just have a question.
Sure.
Awesome.
Does he have a minute?
No, you're fine. Do you have a minute?
Sure.
The reason I'm calling is I'd like to send over what I have. It's called a request for expression of interest. It's a one-page summary about a development partnership that my firm seeks to establish with a company in your space. It just has enough information on it to see whether or not it's something Kevin would be interested in chatting with me about.
Okay. So where we are right now in the call, what has happened differently? In the beginning of the call, I was extremely upfront with the assistant about exactly why I was calling. I'm calling with a question, and then I asked if she had a minute. People don't do that with assistants, right? And because it's such a drastic contrast, you heard the assistant say, "Oh, I'm sorry. Does Kevin have a minute?" And I'm like, "No, you're fine. I'm calling for you." "Oh, okay. Yeah, sure. I have a minute." Right? And then I explained very clearly what it is I'm trying to send. Okay, so now the assistant, what is going through the assistant's mind? This is starting to look like a familiar pattern again, even though I was drastically different in the beginning. The assistant is now thinking, okay, here we go. This is the CEO of a company with 5,000 employees. Okay, here we go. He's going to ask me for the assistant's, or he's going to ask me for the CEO's email address, and then I'm going to have a sparring match. I can't provide that. Oh, I don't want to send it to you because it's confidential.
Can I email that over to you?
There you go. There's your drastic contrast.
Sure. My email's, my name's Elizabeth. My email's.
Okay. E.com.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and your name's okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right. I'll send that over in a few minutes.
Okay.
Would you mind if I touch base in a few days to see if it's something?
Sure.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Have a great weekend.
Okay, thanks.
Appreciate
Okay, you
it.
too.
Bye.
Okay, I never get that, "Oh, we'll let you know of interested response." Because right before that, right when they were thinking, okay, now here we go with the sparring match, I'm like, is that something I can send over to you? That is the drastic opposite of what they were expecting. So then they're like, oh, sure, yeah, you can send it to me. Give me the email address, no hesitation. And then I say, well, look, can I give you a call back in a couple of days to see if you've had a chance to take a look? Here's what normally happens. Of course, they say yes to that as opposed to the normal response. He'll let you know if interested. I've done this enough to see the pattern. This is what happens. The assistant will actually print out what I'm sending and physically take it into the person's office and put it on their desk. Most of the time. So you're having problems inboxing with your emails? Try that. I mean, that's the power of drastic contrast, embedding subtle courtesy into your approach, right? Not coming across as presumptuous, doing the absolute opposite of what's annoying, and giving them relevant clarity in the beginning so there's no guesswork going on in their mind. What does this really represent? Because guesswork creates resistance, right? It's a feedback loop. Whether it's an assistant or I'm calling the prospect directly, if there's any lingering questions in their mind, They're too distracted to make a decision. And that's why email open rates or response rates for emails are low. That's why cold calls don't go anywhere. And you hear cold calls that don't go anywhere, it doesn't usually end like, abruptly with, no, we don't want to do anything like that, or we're not interested in talking to you. Usually it builds up to that with confusion first. I'm sorry, what was your company called again? I'm sorry, what? And they ask a question about something you just explained clearly. They weren't with you when you explained it because they were stuck on a lingering question. So that's the relevant clarity piece. So those three things together, if you looked at like the psychology behind what really makes outbound effective, there's a whole ton of other things you can do in there, all the nuances that we're talking about, all the technology, but let's put that aside for a moment. If you look at the psychology behind it, and you embed those fundamental principles in your approach, you're going to get a much, much different result. Questions? Sure. Mm-hmm. Like a new rep to the company or a rep that's already in a company? The average, so the program I have it goes over 6 weeks, right? And it includes video learning, and then we have a call every week with the team for 90 minutes. I see a spike in the data, usually, in some cases 180% in the first 4 weeks. If they're totally new, I have clients that sell very, very complex. It's not just one thing. There's a whole bunch of different industries, and the reps actually have to focus on more than one vertical. That's a little slower inside of 8 weeks. We've using this process though, we have reduced onboarding times for very complex products from 7 months down to 4 months across the team in Japan, Beijing, EMEA, and the US for the same company. The company is called Wind River. In fact, everybody here, Wind River's the company that no one's ever heard of, but everybody knows of. If anybody flew here today, the software that keeps the plane in the air is Wind River. Cool. Go ahead. Mm-hmm. 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 The gatekeeper, by the way, when you say gatekeeper, are you talking about executive assistant or are you talking about an operator? Mm-hmm. If it's an assistant, that assistant I spoke with is capable of being aggressive. Believe me. Very capable of being aggressive because that assistant gets probably 10 or 15 calls just like mine every day at a company like she represents. It's like with anything, it's much less what you're saying, it's how you say it. If your team adopted some of these principles, you'd see a difference. And you listen to the call recordings, you can hear in their tonality the difference. When I make those calls to assistants, do I get aggressive gatekeepers? Hell yeah, I get aggressive gatekeepers, but they're not as aggressive when you disarm them with these kinds of things. What makes them really aggressive is when they don't achieve relevant clarity in the beginning. So they're like, okay, what is this? What is this? Get to the point, and you're being too vague, trying to not get to the point because you think that you'll trick them. That's when they get really nasty. And I've seen it because I listen to call recordings of the reps that go through the program, and I hear all kinds of call recordings. A lot of times they're not calling gatekeepers. I mean, that's actually something that maybe 10 or 20% of them do. But it's the psychology is still the same. If you cold call a VP of sales and you don't achieve relevant clarity in the beginning, promote an image about what you represent that they're familiar with. They can attach that immediately in their mind without burning any calories to something they're familiar with. If you don't do that in the beginning of the call, you're going to get resistance. I'm going to give you another example to that. I have a client that has a very, very, very hard name to say as a company. Okay, I can actually just tell you this. The company's called Webgility. Okay, And have anybody ever heard of WebGility? No. When they cold call, when I started working with them, when they cold call into companies, their email response rate was flat. And when they cold call into companies, I was listening to the recordings, and 80% of the time, that example of the call I showed you in the beginning was how their calls were going. I'm sorry, what? And they're tripping over each other, and they never get anywhere. How did we solve that problem? Okay. And this is exactly how we solved the problem with email and also with the phone. WebGility is an add-on to QuickBooks. And their personas are all accounting and finance personas, power users. So everybody that is being called or emailed from these reps are power users for QuickBooks. They're deeply familiar with it. Hi, my name is Greg Woodward, calling from WebGility. We're a QuickBooks partner. I'm just calling with a question. Do you have a minute? The problem was totally solved just by indicating you're a QuickBooks partner. Now, later in the conversation or later in the email, they may start to conclude, well, what was the company called again? But it doesn't matter because it's coming from a logical place, not an emotional one. Does that make sense? So that's what reps should do in the beginning if they're having resistance with a prospect, whether it's an EA or a prospect directly, and whether it's an email or a cold call. Go ahead. Yep. Which is probably the case for a lot of companies in here. Yep. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Perception issues. I have clients that are in the payments industry, and they have a very, differentiated product that takes a long time to explain why it's differentiated. And when they hear the name, they immediately assume that they know what it is. Payments, I know that, I'm familiar with that, and they tune out. So that if that's a problem, the truth is you have to come up with messaging that gets to a point that doesn't sound like everything else immediately up front. Here's an example. This is a real example. I have a client that's in the payment space, and they could say, we can process your merchant transactions and save you 10%. Well, that doesn't mean anything. It sounds like noise. It sounds like everything else. But we looked more closely at what they were actually doing to be able to do that. And we were able to call different personas now because of what we were articulating, which is this. We have a novel platform that actually removes part of the transaction cost by eliminating one of the buckets associated with the transaction. I'm saying the same thing, but I'm telling you how we're doing it. And it was true. That's exactly how they're doing it. And there's a reason why they were able to do it that way and other people weren't, which I can get into later. But it's a different way of articulating something that doesn't sound like everything else. And that's a tough problem. So if that is a problem that you're having, you're going to probably have to play around with messaging and make sure you're testing it and looking at what works and what doesn't. It's not an easy problem to fix, but it is something you can address and get a better result with. Cool. Thank you, everybody.